Vinny here. Before this episode, I just wanted to take a minute to let everyone know about the Omaha Roads to Freedom Unconvention. Now, this is going on Friday, May 25th to Sunday, May 27th at the Embassy Suites and Conference Center in La Vista, Nebraska. Speakers include Dr. Ron Paul, Larry Sharp, Nick Sarwark, Dr. Lee Heap Merritt, and more. It's going to be a speakeasy-themed costume ball headed by a steampunk band, so that should be interesting. You can go to www.omahaunconvention.com, and if you use the promo code ThinkLiberty, you can get 20% off. Now, on top of that, they just cut their prices, so if you use our code, you can get a ticket for $40, significantly cheaper than it was when it first started. Think Liberty is going to have a table at the Unconvention. You can come and talk to Chris Oglesby and Caitlin Cloven. Being Libertarian is going to have a table there, too, and there's going to be tons of other people in the Liberty world. So don't forget, Friday, May 25th to Sunday, May 27th, the Omaha Roads to Freedom Unconvention. We'll see you there. Hello, and welcome to the Think Liberty podcast. On this episode 27, I keep losing count. I think it's 27. We have a special guest. As always, I'm Vinny Marshall, and I am joined by Lonnie Dupree.
Hello.
Hello, Lonnie. And I am joined by our previously mentioned special guest, Jack Lloyd. How's it going, Jack?
It's going great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, and thanks a bunch for joining us. This should be a fun episode. Anyone who's not familiar, hasn't seen Jack's name around, Jack is from, just to name a few of the things that he dabbles in, he's Voluntaryist, the comic series, which I'm sure everyone's familiar with, Anarchyball, the page, the Twitter account, the name, the brand, the ball, and free market memes. And that's just to name a few. You keep yourself pretty busy with all this stuff you got going on.
I do. I really keep pretty busy with supporting a lot of different Liberty projects. I've been working heavily behind the scenes with quite a number of them over the years, either consulting or directly producing content for them, whether it's memes or pictures or video and things like that. So there's a couple of key people who make those kinds of things who are the behind the scenes people for some Liberty stuff. And I'm kind of one of those people who does that. So
now, without naming all of them, I mean, I know you're involved in more than just those three. Off the top of your head, do you know how many like brands or projects that you're working on right now?
I mean, quite a few. I mean, it's definitely above my finger count, but in terms of active day-to-day stuff, about 6 that are heavily influenced by whatever I'm doing, whether it's making memes or producing other content for them. So, yeah, I mean, there's a good chance that, memes that you see out there are things that I've made. Very often when you see the meme that isn't all compressed and lossy, right. The original meme, that's the one. I usually am probably one of those top people who's making that original Liberty themed meme that you see out there.
Dang, so you're staying quite busy. That's man, I couldn't do it. I got the Think Liberty stuff, and I couldn't imagine doing anything more than that.
It can be a lot of work sometimes. I mean, fortunately I have my own company, so I'm flexible when I book clients and things like that. But it can definitely be its own full-time job managing Liberty content and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, and especially, I mean, sometimes you're at the whim of the news cycle too, right? Like you don't get to decide when it's time to crank out some memes about a certain topic.
That's true. Yeah, if you want to ride the news cycle wave, you have to be on top of that. So,
I'm sorry, we're gonna have to reschedule your appointment. I got about 10, 15 memes I gotta make, so we're gonna have to put you back till tomorrow.
Right, Trump just imposed tariffs.
I mean, it's come almost to that, but yeah, usually I crank it out really fast and then head out the door.
Fair enough. It's good. It's good to keep that balance. So I want to talk about the Voluntaryist comic. Now, I know you've done a run of this before, and I just kind of like to hear about how that went. I think you're on the second one. Am I wrong there? And if I am, I'm sorry. How many of these have you done?
Well, I'm on the second one of what's the canon story, the origin story. So I've been producing the Voluntaryist series since 2012, and I've had several past issues. I think this is my 8th Indiegogo campaign. everything from the Voluntarists versus State of Zombies to the Voluntarists versus the TSA, Voluntarists versus the NSA, Saving Snowden, stuff like that. So, there's been a number of different titles, but those ones in the past were more prototypes for the future. It was kind of like rough drafting, what it could be. But since the last issue, Voluntary Origins, I've been going with the canon origin story, producing that. And now this campaign that's about a week left, I'm working on the second issue that's just continuing the chronology. So I'm just going from kind of the beginning tale and just going forward, one step at a time in order. Now after, going through that kind of prototyping phase and hyping it up and getting people to see my vision, because that's the hardest part, is getting people to kind of see where you're coming from on something that has never been done before. Right.
And so that's where I got it from. It was the second. I know, because I remember seeing it, and seeing it was the second of something. So this is the origin. Sorry about about botching that one. So
no, you didn't botch it. It's origins too. You're definitely right. It's the second one in terms of the origin story.
Okay. And are these a little bit larger than the comics that you usually release?
Yeah, these ones have been so far, the full length standard comic issue, everything done to the nines in terms of design, in terms of layout and story and things like that. They're not just, shorter snippets or, half stories and previews. So this is, the real deal.
Okay, awesome. And before we move too far off of this, do you want to tell our listeners where they can go to check out this campaign if they want to donate to the project?
Sure. If they want to check it out, there's, only 7 days left here. But volcomic.com is the easiest way to check it out. VOLCOMIC. So volcomic.com. There's links to the Indiegogo campaign right there. There's links to past issues. There's character information, universe, terminology and things like that. You can get on board and kind of see what's going on with it there, just so you don't get lost about the longer Indiegogo name. But you'll find the links right there at volcomic.com.
Now, these are these only digital, or can I get like an actual books, like an actual little comic issue?
Oh yeah, they're digital and print. They actually are printed by Indie Planet, which prints on demand. So you can order it at any time, and it comes in a physical copy, just like you get any Marvel, DC, you name it, comic book. Just this time, you're going to actually see a comic that has a foundational norm that government is evil and is unethical, as opposed to pretty much every single other kind of comic you can imagine out there.
You mean there's no Captain America?
Not like that. Yeah. I mean, obviously there's not a Captain America kind of thing. This is true, voluntarist norms as the ethical foundation. And some people kind of struggle with that. And some of them say, oh, that's so cringy. But I'm like, okay, you watch a guy wearing an American flag, beat up Nazis or whatever. And you don't think about it because you're so indoctrinated and so used to thinking of government as the norm. You think about Wakanda with Black Panther, and during the film, one of the soldiers is like, I serve at the pleasure of the throne, and I'm like, is nobody going to cringe at that someone's going to sit there and say that they serve an inanimate object and they don't care about the ethics of who sits in it? They just worship whoever sits in that throne. I mean, it's kind of nuts when you take a step back and just see how many political subtones are implemented in comic books, and how much there is always a political influence, an ideological, philosophical influence to comics entertainment, because it's drawn out based in the protagonists and what's seen as acceptable and what's seen as normal. So no matter what, every single story does have a philosophy behind it. It does have politics behind it, but it's very often kind of subtly infused into what's seen as right or wrong based on the protagonist's actions. And I just want to turn that on its head for liberty and really change the paradigm of what can be done.
I think that's a really interesting point too, because I find it kind of humorous that people would say that it was quote unquote cringy, because it's to make a piece of entertainment or something like what you're doing, and make it liberty focused. It isn't even at all on the same level as hanging pictures of tyrants in your formal education centers and standing up and making sure that you pledge your allegiance to the state every morning, because that's quite serious. That's not just entertainment. That's not just a leisure. Right. That's not just reading it as a hobby. That's dedicating your life to the existence of the state. So if you want to talk about cringy, if you really want to talk about cringy, I think the United States of America and all those who are big fans of it probably have Voluntaryist the comic beat.
I agree. I mean, it still boggles my mind that, it's normalized that 5-year-olds put their hands over their heart and pledge their lives to a government before they have any idea about what they're pledging their lives to. To me, that is pretty insane when you look at that. And you can take any average person, show them kids saluting a flag in Nazi Germany, show, Chinese kids saluting their leaders, or North Korean kids, all in their uniforms, worshiping their leaders. And they say, oh my gosh, that's so bad or evil. And then you turn around and the American kids are doing the same thing, but they don't bat an eye. It's an incredible dissonance.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's funny because people do see that stuff and they, oh, ew, oh my gosh, can you believe that? And you're doing it here too. That's a very good point. So I'd like to jump right into another topic. We talked a bit about these pictures sitting on the halls of our formal education centers. And so education is something I feel like a lot of people, when they talk about liberty, they get wrapped up in a whole lot of topics. And there's a lot of topics that are often common, but I feel like one that isn't as common as it probably should be is education. And education and how it pertains to the liberty movement, how it pertains to people that are fighting the good fight for liberty. I feel like it's overlooked a lot, to the point where when people bring it up, when you bring up alternative modes of education, people get pretty angry. They get pretty upset. Education is, I definitely think, a sacred cow. So I would like to just touch a little bit on your views of education and the approaches that you appreciate to look at it from. Like, what are some of the things that you espouse when you talk about, education and right there alongside liberty?
Sure. I mean, just a little bit about me, just to give some context to my thoughts. My dad was a 30-year New York City school teacher. He spent, most of his career teaching inner city kids, and I got to see firsthand some of the developments that took place in public schools because of his work. And back in the 80s, even, they had implemented metal detectors and drug dogs and school resource officers, well before it became more popular in the late 90s. And I got to kind of see this change where schools, which were already very forceful with kids, became true prisons. And slowly over time, more and more of them eroded students' privacy and individual liberty and autonomy to an extreme degree. Longer school hours, more searches and pat downs, and just every kind of possible, in terms of government terms, Fourth Amendment violations you can imagine. And later on, I went to law school and I studied juvenile defense specifically. I studied criminal defense and juvenile justice issues. And I saw some of the problems firsthand when I was working with young people as a defense attorney. And I was defending, kids who had been charged with truancy and other types of things. And I got to see behind the scenes the school to prison pipeline of young people who, because of the laws and the nature of school, were being turned into criminals. Instead of being helped because of their home life or because of their poverty situation, they were just being charged. They were being arrested. And I further got to experience some of the prison-like nature of school, especially in modern times, being a teacher. I taught at a public school. I taught senior English. I'm University of Cambridge ACE certified, taught University of Cambridge ACE program. I also taught at a middle school. I taught topics including math, geometry honors, and things like that. And I got to see a lot of it firsthand of what's happening that is really accelerating young people's push toward being completely controlled and turned into a docile population. The modern school system is so controlled over children's behavior and actions that it's like you are considered abnormal or dysfunctional or even dangerous for not wanting to participate or conform to the practices of modern schooling. And what this leads to is that especially young boys, especially if you're poor, Black, but at large, young boys are being pushed onto medication or being arrested because they can't conform to this high stakes testing environment where young kids are just being put into rooms and being tested for hours just to meet some district requirement or state funding requirement for all this cronyism that's taking place with testing. And it's really sick what's being done to kids in the name of, quote unquote education. It's not really education. It's just indoctrination and control. But this has been something that has dramatically changed, especially in the past 20 years. The level of control, threats, shaming of children has just dramatically risen. And the drugging of the American boy has just gone up exponentially, with ADD, and now, it's being changed to ADHD diagnosis, which, mind you, is not based on any physical characteristic quality. It's not like a clump of cells like cancer. It's symptoms based. So ADHD is nothing more in large, failing to conform to school in many instances for young people. It's not just, being neuroatypical. It's literally you just don't fit what the teachers demand, and that pushes you toward that. So, I've personally been working toward dismantling the Prussian model, that is the compulsory model of school, where young kids are rounded up and forced to sit for hours at a time and told what they should be, and how wrong they are, how evil or bad they are if they don't conform. And I want to help people realize that there are alternatives through self-directed education. And I want to help encourage families and other people to build those self-directed education centers so that more people can opt out of the very dysfunctional and dangerous compulsory schooling system.
You mentioned something there. I'm interested if you could unpack a little bit more. Self-directed education.
Sure.
What exactly do you mean by that? And if you could give me an example of what a self-directed education would look like.
Absolutely. So self-directed education is kind of both an action and a philosophy. It's the idea that young people are in charge of and are responsible for their education. It's not up to adults to force them through threats. It's not to adults to grade them, which are really, grades are just nothing more than social stigmas and shame. It doesn't really represent a child's interests, passions, or intelligence. So, self-directed education gets out of that mindset of this factory form of schooling that everybody has to be at a certain point by a certain age. And if you're off by a couple of weeks, then you're a problem child. And it recognizes that every individual has a unique path that they can take in life, and they have unique talents and skills that can be fostered. And their time when reading is best, or trying to do math or any other topic in life is best for them is up to the individual. And so this philosophy has been implemented in quite a few places. One of the most popular ones is at the Sudbury Valley School in Massachusetts. And in this school, there are adults who act not as judges, but as mentors, who are resources for the young people that are there. And young people are pretty much free to do whatever they want with their day. If they want to spend their whole day or even year playing video games, they can. But that's not really what necessarily happens over time. Young people get bored. They want to try new things. They want to go out with friends. They want to explore. They want to learn naturally. And there's a professor at Boston named Peter Gray who's done a lot of research on this. And his work, among others, has shown that young children are naturally curious. They have a thirst for knowledge. And if left to their own devices, as long as they have healthy support in terms of the adults who are around them, as long as they have the tools of the culture, they have access to books or computers or whatever else people use in modern day to learn, young people will take it upon themselves to learn what's necessary for their lives. And when the time is right for them, if they want to do anything more advanced or specific, they will take it upon themselves to learn toward that end. And it doesn't mean, self-directed education doesn't mean you can't read a textbook or you can't take a class if you don't want. Of course not. It just means it's up to the individual for when they want to learn those things and when they want to choose those things, instead of it being forced and a child being labeled as dysfunctional or problematic just because they don't fit some government mandated criteria of when they're supposed to know a certain thing that may or may not have any relevance to their life whatsoever.
For the listeners here, I'm gonna play a bit of devil's advocate, and I'm gonna ask you some questions that I would anticipate others who hear this might have. So I want to state that as the pretext here, because I wouldn't want you to think that I'm challenging you on these things.
You can.
Well, no, because I don't necessarily challenge it personally, but I do want to be able to.
I might have a few challenges. So no, not that I disagree, but I do have some questions. So.
Sure. I'll start, and then Lonie, after he takes mine, you can have the floor. So my first question would be, what would you say to someone who is like, okay, so what do you just have kids sitting in there, like putting popsicle sticks on top of each other, all day? What do they learn? Are there nudges involved? Is there any kind of structure, or is it something to where truly it is the system where the children will actually find a direction that has a let's say the term that those who use the argument would call a productive purpose?
I mean, it's just a matter of leaving open opportunities. There are, of course, opportunities for parents to offer to read a book or to do something. Absolutely. But by and large, young people, when they're not pressured, threatened, shamed, cornered, will take it upon themselves to learn whatever it is that they're interested about. They're actually extremely interested and engaged in the world. Everything is new and fresh and exciting to a young child. It's amazing. The jaded view is something that actually springs from years of being threatened and shamed and being told what to do. The schooling system kills the natural human creative spirit and turns young people into just order followers who don't have any passion for learning because they associate learning with chore, with tedious tasks, with trivia, with threats. And so it's actually the opposite. When you unleash a child's ability to learn, they actually take it upon themselves to ask questions and explore, and the adults around them, if they're acting as helpers and not judges, do what they can to help foster that child's interests and curiosities in whatever capacity they can.
Okay, Lonie, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Well, I guess my thought is, do the adults or parents have, like, I know you said there's no grading, but is there, I guess, a sort of accountability on the student's part, on the child's part, that, hey, what did you learn today? And if the kid's like, I don't know, I just kind of was just, I played with a stick, and they didn't do anything for weeks on end, months even, and they're not learning. They're not, because some children do have learning disabilities, legitimate ones. Some children are generally just disinterested in things, and they lack motivation and stuff like that. For children like that, should there be some sort of accountability? Like, hey, what did you learn? Hey, okay, well, you need to start learning something. Pick something and learn. Read about this. Okay, what is this TV show that you like? Okay, well, what do you like about that? Learn about that. Something like that. Like, is there any sort of direction and like, hey, you need to start doing stuff. You need to start, taking responsibility. Does that come from this kind of schooling?
No, actually, that would be the opposite of what the goal is. When you're putting pressure on children and making what's almost an ultimatum, it actually disincentivizes young people from being curious about what it is, that they're thinking about or experiencing. The idea that young people aren't being reflective or just are doing nothing, I think, is largely a myth. It comes often from the heels of analyzing children in improper context, which is being schooled. And when young people are schooled, they're exhausted. They are drained emotionally and physically because it's a very abusive, dominant, submissive environment. So when people look at young people and say, oh, look, he just wants to watch TV or play video games. It's like, yeah, after he spent a whole day being threatened and shamed and forced to do someone else's bidding, there's a decompression that's absolutely needed. I don't see the concerns that you have in terms of even learning disabilities, even if there was one. Actually, many instances of those who seek out self-directed education are parents whose child has autism or some other issue, where the school doesn't effectively accommodate their child. And I can give actually many specific stories and examples, for reference, I can link you to, of families who pulled out their kids because the schools were failing their child, who wasn't ready to do things by the school's terms, but given the time and space, because of their developmental, neuroatypical issues, they eventually did reach the point of being interested in reading or writing or whatever it was that may have been a concern to the adult in school who felt that they needed to threaten or shame a child because they didn't conform to the government's idea of what that child should be doing at that age. And it's actually the opposite that happens. That is that those children are very much interested and able to do those things that are higher order thinking skills, given the space and not the pressure to do those things, given the time, because human beings are not all the same in terms of their developmental cycle. There are wide-ranging differences. And the problem with school is it tries to categorize everyone's brain development within a very narrow range of weeks, when in reality, the difference for many people is in years. The brain doesn't even stop developing in terms of, the gray matter and frontal cortex until 25-ish for many people. And the developmental cycle actually, changes widely depending on puberty and so forth. So the notion of what schooling does, which regiments young children into these narrow windows of acceptability, is absolutely horrendous. It's destructive to the individuated needs of very different human beings about, when is best for them to learn different things for their own time and their own purpose. So I don't see the idea of, needing to force or push kids, as a forefront thing here. Rather, give them the space and ask in kindness and in earnest, what they're thinking about. Ultimatums would be trying to push them back into that compulsory mindset. But parents, again, can absolutely share things with their kids, can leave things around, or books or resources or whatever it is that their child can discover. They can ask questions and so forth. But how that's done is very critical. It'd be, and I think this is kind of an interesting analogy. It'd be just as strange if you, were with a woman and you did the same thing about sex and you said, "Are you going to give me sex yet? Are you going to do it yet? I don't really like what you're doing." It'd be really weird, right? When you think about sex and stuff like that, like how awkward it would be to kind of give an ultimatum about sex or be pushy about sex. But it's actually very similar in terms of biological concept and response. And that is that the natural learning process for that activity is just like learning. It happens naturally at the proper time and in the proper context. And when it's forced, just like anything else that's, forced on someone through threats, violence, and shaming, it can have very long-term damaging consequences. Even though you might see the end result and the product of, oh, well, look, they turned out fine. It's not really that they turned out fine for an optimal condition, right? You can get abused, but still be a functioning adult who can work and sleep and eat. It doesn't mean that the abuse was good or that there wasn't a better outcome. And that's what self-directed education really is it's helping young people reach their maximized potential without the threats, shaming, and coercion.
That's fascinating to me. And you bring up something that's very interesting because, I do think it's kind of a natural reaction to hearing this stuff where someone just kind of replies with, well, what do you do? I mean, Lonie and I both kind of touched on it. So obviously it's something that came to our minds, but it's, well, what do you do with the kid that wants to do nothing? But what's interesting to me is you point out, well, that's kind of a myth. And then, so, I've got children and I think back to like my oldest, he's 7. And it's actually true. He will walk around the house and talk to me about anything and everything that he's seeing on TV, that he's interested in, that he's reading in books. And to your point, there are so many indications throughout the day of things that he's interested in that he nudges himself toward. Right. And of course, as a parent, I do go out of my way to make sure that when he expresses interest in things, I'm doing as best I can to help educate him on what those things are and get him more of those things in front of him so he can go further down that. And that is fascinating to think about. Children do have a very curious outlook on life, and they do ask many questions. So another question I'd have then is one that I assume others would pose is, what do you do when someone says, or how would you reply is a better way to put it, when someone would say, okay, but what about math and what about history and what about like these basic fundamentals that everyone in the traditional education systems are going to rely on, right? Like you said yourself, you've been through the formal education cycle, and you've got these core classes that you'd have to do, right? You'd have to go through this certain amount of math, and you'd have to go through this certain amount of history, and you'd have to go through this certain amount of X, Y, or Z. So what do you say to someone that says, well, what about those things, those fundamentals that we have to make sure that, kids learn?
Right. I mean, and to me, this is something that I think is very easily debunked as well when one takes a look at their own life and experiences. If one's honest about their own learning and about their own, especially if you want a compulsory school environment, if you're honest about your own learning, you would recognize that there's some flaws with that thinking, because anyone who's been through a compulsory school environment would know not everything that they learned in school was necessary to their career path. I've never met a single person who absolutely needed to, read The Crucible or Jane Eyre for their life in order to make money and do things, right? It's never met someone who absolutely had to know what the Bantu-speaking peoples of Africa did, thousands of years ago in order to do their job. Sure, there might be someone who wants to be an archaeologist or someone who wants to be a historian, but by and large, when you're talking about what actually takes place in compulsory education, it's a lot of just regurgitation of what other people have done with more intellectual rigor. And very often it comes with a giant skewed bias towards supporting government, worshiping rulers and bloodshed, and focusing not on ethics or on principles, but just on the superficial. And that's really what school does, is it gets students to only think in the superficial. And that includes even math. And I'm a big math fan. I still work with young people, and I tutor and things like that. And I always enjoyed math, and took statistics in college and did college calculus and all that stuff. But it took some time for me to reflect on my own math education, look back in time, and realize most of what is done in school is not critical thinking by any means. It's just finding the formula and memorizing it and pounding it in a couple days before the test, and for many kids, forgetting it, because you don't really actually have the time to dive deep in the materials. The amount of time it takes to do proofs, to think about the history behind the mathematics and how it was found, nobody has that time. You have a test, you need to memorize Pythagorean theorem by Friday, and that's it. You don't have the time to actually do the critical thinking and the introspection. And most often those who do, that is those who are really interested in math, if you study famous mathematicians, they often have outside help with someone who's very skilled in that area for deeper conversations. So the factory school model doesn't give depth of knowledge, and it doesn't really give young people much anything other than truly what is trivia. It's not really applied. It's something that a student could literally just flip through in a book and read in a matter of weeks, if you think about it in terms of what's being covered and what's actually just tested. Because as you know, the textbook says a lot, but the test only covers a little bit. So it doesn't really speak to everything that you could possibly read. So I find that really what school is actually doing in terms of those bases that are supposed to be covered is giving young people an inflated sense that they're intelligent or smarter or better than people, for being an A student or things like that, when really it's just about obedience training. It's not actually critical thinking skills. It's not really a deep, multivariate analysis of different historians and source documents and, how things are discovered. It's just, drain, put it in the brain, drain it, rinse, repeat. And I think that's really sad, because what it does is it devalues long-term introspection. It devalues deeper conversation and replaces it with an artifice of just getting what you need to know to, repeat and obey for the look, which makes sense because in the Prussian model schooling, it was meant to get kids to be obedient for government work or for work in a factory. So when it comes to young people being able to have that free space for deep thinking and to have Socratic method and to actually engage in long-term oriented skills, you're not going to get that otherwise. You're not going to get that in school, which requires you that even if you got a 70%, a 80%, you didn't get it, to just keep moving on for the next quiz or test. You don't have time for that. You got to keep going. So I think the schooling model is extremely dysfunctional, and the one size fits all, this myth of average is just absolute bogus. And the evidence of what that creates, I think, is very obvious if you look at the population now in America versus 100 years before the Prussian-styled schooling. And what you just see is that everyone comes out of school without meaningful critical thinking skills as to government and philosophy and ethics, right? People have the capacity for space age technology, and they have Stone Age philosophy because they're given the government metric of what is good and what is noble, and they're given a government standard of regurgitated knowledge. And I think that is something that needs to be really examined and thought of as a compared to what, especially when you consider self-directed education. I think there's lots of evidence that suggests that self-directed education is not this boogeyman that people want to make it out to be when compared to what actually is taking place in the compulsory schooling model.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. This is all very interesting to me. Lonie, do you have anything that you'd like to ask before we move on from this?
I had something, but I think I forgot it. So yeah, I mean, if you want to move on to something else, that's fine.
Sure. Yeah. Another interesting point. It's funny because we battle against, I guess, our preconceived notions and then reality. As you were talking about all that, the one thing that stuck out to me was just like how you mentioned it before. You need that decompression, and I remember, I kind of flash back to sitting in class and staring at the overhead projector, and it's like, you got a young kid, everyone knows kids have no shortage of energy and get up and go in them. And I swear I've never felt more exhausted in my life than when I had to sit in front of an overhead projector and just take notes in a silent classroom while the teacher went and did something. And that's not really teaching so much as it's a lot of what you outlined. But I guess that's not, for the sake of preconceived notions, that's not what people think of when they think of school.
Yeah, I was homeschooled, so I had a completely different kind of experience from projectors and stuff like that. So, but mine wasn't it certainly wasn't self-directed or whatever. It was fairly rigid, not too much, but less so than a governmental school. But there was a lot of direction, I guess, like I guess as you would say, like if I'm going to compare it to something like I'm growing some peppers right now. Now I'm not clipping things, every week I do that. I go and clip leaves and little things. I'm not clipping things to direct it in a certain way. I'm letting it grow where it wants. And I'm just kind of taking things off that help promote growth, that is coming into place. And that was kind of, I guess, as I was taught, still I was reminded like, hey, you got to do this. This has to be done. I was tested, things like that. But my interests were promoted, I guess you could say, rather than, we don't have a class on this. They took the time to find books or something that were that pertain to my interests.
Well, I would like to move on from this and talk to Jack about some other stuff.
Oh, yeah.
As fascinating as this is, I could stay on this all night. But
yeah,
Jack, for anybody, for me, Lonie, or anyone else who wants to read more about self-directed education, do you guys have anywhere? Not you guys. Do you have anywhere people can go and read about this, or is there like a go-to spot that you'll send people to when they want to learn more about self-directed education?
Absolutely. I have people go to self-directed.org. It's a great organization. It's a not-for-profit that promotes research in the field and also showcases many self-directed learning centers. and they have a fantastic outlet there. And Peter Gray is also one of their board members, as well as several others who are, researchers or active self-directed learning center operators. So self-directed.org is a great resource, and the works of John Taylor Gatto are great reads on this topic as well.
Okay, so I appreciate that. You've given us all a little bit more to think about and to read about. I want to parlay that into another topic that's been hot on the minds of libertarians these days, and that's Arvin Vohra. So Arvin also shares this, I would assume, close opinions to you about the education system, and I'm sure you've seen some of the ways that he's espoused those ideas. I guess the first question I would ask you is, what's your general opinion on some of the heat he's found himself in lately?
Yeah, I think as far as Arvin's overall intents and his underlying principles, I really can't find anything I would disagree with him on in terms of his foundational principles and message, which is that government is the problem, it's not the solution. And no matter how much of a tricky hot button issue it sounds to be, government's going to make that issue much more worse if you give it the power to regulate, dictate the parameters of that situation. So I think on that, we definitely agree. And he said some things that, may have not been the best framing or phrasing for mainstream politics. But I think in the end, most of the publicity he's gotten is just because of people who want to hate on him, and share his stuff that would have probably not really gone very far, been well known otherwise. So,
yeah, I have my own opinions about how he goes about things. I will say this, and I agree with you actually. So as far as his principal positions and the way he talks about philosophy, I agree with pretty much all that he says. I think he's dead on. He's very principled and he's very intelligent in that respect. What I'll find is I do see how the stuff that he posts online is a bit inflammatory, and I'm not exactly sure if it's the way he types or the way he puts his message out in text form. I'll tell you what, though, I haven't seen a video yet where I thought that to be the case. I think it's one of those cases where maybe something is missed online, if not by him, then by people that read it or something like that. Because when he talks about these very same ideas, he's been doing more video streams lately. I think it's really poignant, and he makes his points very clearly and very intelligently. And I don't know. It seems there's some kind of disconnect when it just goes to just text, where stuff either comes off more harsh than he means it to, or maybe he doesn't articulate it in the way he can do it on the way that he does do it, on video or whatever it is. I get why people get upset. I do. But it's not dynamic to me, I guess. It's been interesting to watch, if nothing else.
Yeah.
I feel that he's kind of he's figured out a way that he can troll whenever he's typing, but maybe he might crack himself up a bit too much. So he'll be laughing. So it's when on video, he just okay, serious time, puts on a serious face and says his thing and everything goes just fine. But when typing, he's probably just yeah, I'm going to say this, and he just types and, that's what I'm kind of thinking. I'm thinking he's having fun with it, because he's laughing to himself as he's writing all this stuff. And
I don't know, man. I don't know if he's laughing. I've been in a couple private messages where he was kind of going, I guess I'll just say, for lack of a better term, or head to head over people about the kind of messages that he delivers. And it sure doesn't seem like he thinks it's funny. I think he just, well, no, I mean, I can only give my own observations. I just think for him, the principled positions are that important. But I don't know. I don't like to stick too much talking about people when they're not there, because it's not totally fair. But it is interesting. I think maybe all of us a little bit. Life loses a little bit of its edge when you go online, when you don't have to talk to people face to face, and maybe it lets us be able to get our ideas out in a way that we're intimidated to do when we're in a face-to-face scenario. So what you get online is kind of the pure and naked form of some people's ideas. And maybe that pure form of Arvin's ideas are really offensive to some people.
I suppose. I mean, I get what he's saying, and like y'all have said, the underlying principle I agree with. You know, I'm all for privatizing education. I'm all for looking at different forms, different methods of educating young people. You know, experimental things. I'm all for all of that. You know, anything that we can do to get rid of the traditional accepted model that we currently have, I'm all for. However, I don't know. I guess it's not a priority for me. You know, like me, my thing is like privatized, thinking of it in a capitalist business kind of sense. Like, okay, well, I don't know. I don't care. Do the same thing. Just don't take tax money, or, you know, become an education tycoon or something. You know, smoke a big cigar with a big cowboy hat. You know, I don't care. You know, it's just not like it's not something I think about like all the time. I probably should. I probably really should. But yeah, I guess this hasn't been a priority for me like it has been for some people.
Well, I guess then his job is done, right? Because you just said it yourself, right? It's not something I think about, but I probably should. And I'm sure that if, you know, he were to hear that, he would consider that well worth his time, his efforts, because I think that's the whole name of the game, right? Is to get people to think about things that they wouldn't otherwise. So we'll move on from that. On the tail end of it, I'll say, so I think a lot of the arguments people have, and this is an argument that I've said myself in the past, is that you kind of got to know your audience a lot of times when you're, I guess for lack of a better term, marketing liberty. So Jack, I'm curious, as far as knowing your audience, you know, a good example of this is to say, you can still push these principles. Maybe you don't have to call teachers welfare whores. There could be better ways to address things. So, and that's something coming from me in my own opinion. What are some of the approaches that you like to take? Some of the things that you know are effective when you're marketing kind of the message of liberty, be it from your comic book or, you know, any of these memes that can keep you busy throughout the day?
I would say I like to go and kind of do two things. One is guerrilla, and that, you know, and obviously not the animal, guerrilla tactics in terms of injecting the message of liberty in venues that may not have normally seen that kind of content. So for example, when I started the taxation is theft trend, and you might be saying, what? And yeah, I did. I can prove it even. So when I started the taxation is theft trend, what I did is I used a meme that had things that said, you know, 7 things every child needs to hear. Maybe you've seen it at some point. So what I did is I put, you know, there's nice things in there, but then in the midst of those, I put, you know, besides, you know, you're great, say you're great, hugs or whatever, I put, you know, taxation is theft, right? Right. And by doing that, you know, I managed to get a bunch of shares that people, who, you know, without reading the full thing, shared it, not because it's a taxation stuff, but because they shared it for the other parts without fully getting to the bottom of the thing, right? So sometimes I like using those kind of tactics to get people to inadvertently share controversial messages, right? That's kind of a fun way to break it in, because if it's too much on its face, a lot of people reject it outright. You know, if you just put taxation theft or something, you're not going to probably get much traction from your mainstream status, you know, RRD person. But if you bury it and you hide it, or you make it not clear at first, you can get people to share things or promote things that at first, you know, they don't see it. So that's one way that I like to do things. And then the other thing is just humor. I think why humor is so powerful is because it gets people to drop their walls. If you're genuinely funny, it doesn't matter what political ideology you hold. If you can get somebody to laugh, you've just broken down their walls. Because the fact that you know that someone's laughed, it's like they've just realized, okay, that was kind of funny, right? It opens them up. It takes down that defensiveness that is already there, whether conscious or subconsciously, because they've been pre-programmed. I mean, if you went to public school, you're definitely programmed, but you've been pre-programmed to accept certain norms. So how do you get someone to break that? Well, outside of drugs, you have to use something that lets them, that lets them kind of let down their walls one way or another. I think, here's a funny corollary is you may have seen the YouTube show Hot Ones. You ever see that where celebrities eat hot wings with a guest? You ever see that on YouTube?
I haven't, but I'm going to go check it out. It actually sounds fun.
It's great. So there's this guy and he interviews all kinds of celebrities, all kinds of walks of life. And they go through a chicken wing challenge where they start with a very low Scoville, the heat for the sauce, and they work all the way up to like a 2 million Scoville. It's going to make you cry most likely. So
wow.
Right. So what's great about this is that because of the heat, it drops the person's being interviewed, it drops their guard, right? The further they go, the more they just get relaxed because the heat is taking their mind off of their normal guard about how they'd say things and stuff. And so it makes for an amazing interview because they'll say things or let things slip they might not have normally because they're so, bogged down with the heat of the hot sauce that other things come through. And so it's just really funny. But I think that kind of principle applies to messaging. How can you get people to drop their guards? Because that's where you're really at. You're at either a genuine, conscious guard where someone's like, I'm not going to listen to you. Or you're at a subconscious guard where someone's been programmed their whole life to think the state is great and, it should control everything. So you have to break through that. And that was something that I think, Anarchyball did well for quite a time. I haven't been doing as much with them at the moment because I'm focused on other projects too much right now. But that was the main thing that we worked on with Anarchyball from 2013, especially 2017, was, being just really funny because, if you're not funny and, you make these lame memes with your statements, or you make these, lame jokes, like it doesn't matter what your ideas are. No one's going to like you or take you seriously. And that's where some people come up with and, that mantra of the left can't meme or, the SJWs who try to like make jokes, but they're really stupid. Right. And
the left can't meme.
Yeah.
So.
It's
just pretty true. So.
I don't operate in the left-right paradigm as far as a mainstream because I'm a voluntarist, but the concept is there, and the concept is true in terms of mainstream politics. Like it's just not funny. Like you can't be funny when you're triggered over everything. You can't really be funny, when you're taking the dumbest things so seriously. And that I think that's why they've always lost those grounds, at least ideologically, where others have gained, is because those who had the ability to be funny when others were just getting, their pants in a bunch, were successful. And, you can kind of trace some of these things too, just in mainstream comedians. Like you look at Dave Chappelle and his frustrations, like when he goes to, do comedy bits, like he even mentions that he can't get the same reactions from people stuff because everybody's so uptight from where he used to be, when he was just so controversial all the time when he's, doing his 90s to like 2010 arena, stand-ups and stuff. So that's the key is get in the guerrilla stuff, get it when they're not suspecting it, and make people laugh, get down the guard. If you can get those two things down, you've done half the battle. You've gotten the message to them and you've gotten to let down their guard. You're on the path to success.
Yeah. And I think, I think it's safe to say it's worked for you to this point.
Yeah. I thought you were actually talking about like gorilla memes, like the animal, like Harambe, not like 2 years ago, man. You gotta move on from Harambe. I thought you were talking about like real like gorilla memes.
That's good.
All right.
No, that's good. That's That's nice. I learned a little something on that myself. I'm gonna take that with me. We got a little bit of time left. I'm gonna go a little longer. Normally we go an hour. We can go a little tiny bit longer. We've had people asking us to talk a little bit more about cryptocurrency on the podcast, and I know you're a bit interested in it as well. I love cryptocurrency. I love the idea of a free market for currency, and I love the idea that it's currency that actually has some really interesting utility based on, obviously, the different kind of cryptocurrency you're looking at. Now, we're at this place in the market where there's, boy, I don't even know how many. What is it over? I forget the last time I was on CoinMarketCap, but there's something like 1,500 currencies. I could be way off even, but they're everywhere now. There's tons of them. Some of them are BS. Most of them are probably BS, but some of them are pretty good.
Verge.
Verge. You know, look, I have
Verge is actually okay. It's just I can't buy Verge.
It's the Twitter.
I'm done with Verge. Absolutely done with it.
I don't know. Yeah. Well, I won't stick on Verge too much. They're doing things. They're making moves, right? They got a partnership with Pornhub. That's more than I've done. So, what are your opinions on cryptocurrency, Jack? And what are some that you like, some that you might dislike, and why?
Sure. I mean, I think the concept of cryptocurrency is fantastic in terms of I think it really reinvigorated the discussion about what creates value, how can money arise, and what's necessary to have a sustainable kind of, medium of exchange, of communicated value. And to that end, I think that cryptocurrency has done a great job of actually drawing new people into the ideas of liberty. It's reinvigorated this idea of, there can be alternatives to fiat. There can be things that are much more efficient market-wise. And, security could come through market means, through technological, measures of privacy. I think that's been really great. Obviously, there's some troubles that come up with cryptocurrencies in terms of scalability issues. And you're talking about that, the block size, which is just basically the number of transactions in a certain, you can call it almost digitally, like a digital white paper that has to be replicated and confirmed. But basically, there's those issues. There's the issues of some things getting hacked if they're, not a good cryptocurrency in terms of, actually blockchain style. There's the issues of government legislation and regulation trying to shut it down. There's the issues of, fraud and people, trying to do things to swindle people out of money with exchanges, and BitConnect and other things, and things that happened in the past with Gox. So, there's a lot of learning that's going on here, but I see crypto conceptually as nothing short of revolutionary. I think that it's paved the way for people to think outside of government solutions, and has kind of rekindled the spirit of thinking about how people could perceive a new kind of economic organization without government control, without government borders restricting that. So I think that part's beautiful, no matter what happens ultimately with the crypto market.
I think now this is just my own, I suppose, simpleton way of looking at it. The way that I can break it down in my mind, in the sense of like property. You look at land, around the earth. Property is finite. You can only own so much of it because other people own some. And in this way, since we're kind of moving into this new digital world, it's big boom. Everything is online. It's almost a way that you can own property digitally, and I think that's kind of cool. That's how I kind of break it down to myself.
Well, I think that's fair.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I think it's fair too, because a lot of these cryptocurrencies based on a what's called a proof of work system. So if anyone's not familiar with it, you take something like Bitcoin itself, and the whole idea behind Bitcoin is it was literally designed to work as if it were replicating a mining process, just like you would with gold or any other precious metal. And in that sense, the whole core concept is absolutely to produce a piece of digital property that wasn't there before. It was mined, it was created, that you can have and you can own. It has its own scarcity model out there on the World Wide Webs, and even even past the World Wide Webs. You've got your cold storage wallets and your hardware like that. So as far as crypto, let's get into preferences. Which do you like? If you could pick one that you like the most, Jack, what crypto are you a fan of?
It's tough to say at this point, because they each have their ups and downs. The one that I was monitoring for a while is Monero, but there's some issues there to just watch out for. As far as some potential ASIC issues, but I think that for me, what I always look for when it comes to crypto and things like in that realm is I always look to see what other utilities are there with it. For example, Steam, even though it's not, a mining based crypto, it has a platform built with it. It has a blogging community built with it, and there's apps that can be built on it. So I always try to look for something that has more to it than just the, you could say, coinage that goes along with it. I'm always looking for new elements of privacy or utility that stacks on top of just I can send, a perceived value to anyone around the world.
Yeah, I agree. That to me is also one of the most fascinating parts. That's something I like to look into myself. Okay, fair warning. I'm not given anything by the team to say this. I've mentioned this cryptocurrency a little bit before. I'm a fan of it. I have it. I just want to put that out there. But Aragon, have you heard of Aragon?
Yeah. Here we go again.
I know.
You can make a government on the thing. You don't need government anymore. You got Aragon. That's how I read it every time.
It's a fascinating concept. The whole goal of Aragon is to decentralize governance. It's a fascinating approach. They even have a platform and everything. The downfall here is it is an ERC20 token. They did have an ICO, but it's interesting for you, Jack. If you might be interested, or anyone else listening that hasn't already done it, you should go read up on Aragon. It's interesting where they're coming from. The creator has a couple of YouTube videos where he talks about the whole kind of mission behind it, and it's very political. It's very interesting to read about because you have a situation here where, like you said, Jack, it's opening up the conversation of liberty, and then you have essentially a crypto being built, and the utility is exactly that, to promote liberty. And so I find that very interesting as someone who also is interested in the utilities that can be provided, by these coins.
Right.
I didn't ask you, Lonnie, though.
I like it. It's just you just talk about it a lot. So.
I know. I do. I shill the hell out of that coin. What about you, Lonnie? What are you into? What currency you like right now?
Really, the only things I have right now, I only have 4. So I'm just kind of like I haven't really diversified too much, like, even though I've been at it for a little while. But I do like, I have Ethereum, Digibyte, Dragon Chain, and Storm. I like Storm because I like some of the concepts behind it, about how you can, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Mechanical Turk, Amazon Mechanical Turk, but I think they're supposed to be doing something similar to that, where you can be paid for, micro tasks or whatever they might be called, to where you can be basically your artificial intelligence. You do things that an app or some sort of algorithm cannot do, that the human eye actually has to perform, like read a receipt or something like that, or anything really. So they have that, but like you said, it's more of like what you can do to earn the coin and things like that versus the coin itself. I guess. I don't know. I like those. Dragon Chain was made by Disney, and I trust Disney with my life. I love Disney. I think I've seen every Disney movie that I don't know. So,
well, to be fair,
I believe in it because it's Disney. So
to be
I
fair,
heard Disney and I bought it.
Yeah, I got a big ass bag of Dragon. I shill the hell out of that coin too, but I think Dragon Chain is partnered with Disney. I wouldn't say that Disney created it. Dragon Chain came out, and from what I believe.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, Disney is a part of it, so that's good enough for me.
That's essentially what sold me to is, oh, Disney's in? I'm in. Yeah.
Yeah. And like Digibyte, I need to do a little bit more research on it, but I kind of stumbled across it because I was trying to move something from Binance to another exchange, and to pay the lowest transaction fee. I could do it if I sold everything for Digibyte and then sent the Digibyte. And I did that, and the whole process took like a few minutes. And I was like, man, this is pretty fast here.
Yeah.
And the transaction fee was like 0.02 Digibyte or something ridiculously small like that. And, I was like, I like the way this performs, like the way, sending it across exchanges and stuff like that. So I got some of that too.
Yeah, Digibyte's interesting. It's not the most popular. I feel like they have a more modest marketing team. They're not the most popular cryptocurrency out there, but you're exactly right. Like all the fundamental tasks that a currency is supposed to do, it does really well. They have their own blockchain. Yeah. It moves really quick. It's super duper cheap. They cover all the bases. So before we get out of here, Jack, you're such a fascinating guest. I want to keep you just for a bit longer, if that's okay. And I want to touch on philosophy a bit. And I want to ask you, we talk about philosophy quite a bit on this show. I'm a fan of reading all kinds of philosophy and all kinds of philosophers. And I was curious if you have some philosophers that have influenced you in a significant way, and kind of what your, I guess, preferred overall philosophy is.
Sure. I don't really know that I could put down a particular philosopher and say it accurately, because I don't consider myself to be a philosopher buff. I don't really think that I've derived what I think or why I think based on some historical analysis of different kinds of philosophers. I mean, I'm sure I've crossed over or read at various points different people who you've probably read or maybe even admire, but I couldn't put a specific name or thing to it. A lot of my own philosophy has been from experience and thinking through things kind of on my own, and sometimes through prompts and conversations. Just like we're having right now. I mean, to me, that is philosophy, that when you're talking with other people and discussing ideas and why you believe what you believe, and if you believe what you believe is really real. To me, that's the most engaging thing, is just talking with people about it and pushing your own limits of your mind. So to that end, you could say that I'm a voluntarist. That's my foundational philosophy. I think that my personal goal is to maximize consent and minimize the initiation of violence against the bodies and properties of others. And in that line, I do everything I can to try to hone that and build more accuracy about that.
That's interesting. So what brought you to the ideas of liberty and voluntarism then? How'd you find your way here?
So when I was in college, there was a history professor who was speaking about the American eugenics movement. And it was the first time I had heard about this. And it shocked me so much that in the United States before Hitler, there was literally a program for trying to create a perfect race and eliminating unwanted people. I mean, in fact, there was a famous court case, Buck v. Bell, where Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes said that 3 generations of imbeciles was enough when he sentenced Carrie Buck to be, forcibly, you could say, sterilized, her ovaries removed. So I was shocked by this. I was shocked that over 65,000 people in the United States were forcibly sterilized by the U.S. government up until 1979 in Virginia. And that caused me to reflect on everything else I knew. It made me say, if I didn't know this, what else don't I know about government? I mean, this is nuts. How could this not be taught to everybody that this happened in America? So I started to do my own research, revisiting everything I ever believed or thought about, from childhood. And, this might make you laugh a little bit, but Alex Jones's films were a part of that, because I was, just researching and looking at things. And in many ways, his films actually cover a lot of these things, not gay frog stuff here, but his older films, actually covered real historical events. The Obama deception before, especially Endgame, things like that, actually did cover real events and things that you can go and independently fact check. And that's what it kind of pushed my journey, is I was looking at those things like, oh, does that really happen? Let me go research. So one thing, kind of led to another. And the more I researched about the nature of government, the more I realized, whoa, everything that we're taught about government is just a lie. You know what I mean? Everything that's really bad in the world has been at the hest of governments, murdering people and murdering, each other. That is the leadership, and people being pawns. And I was like, this is nuts. And then eventually, I guess you can call this guy a philosopher if you want, this guy named Mark Stevens, who has this book called Adventures in Legal Land. And he talks about legal issues and just fighting the government and the law on this thing called the No State Project. And he's not a lawyer, but I thought it was interesting, some of the things that he was saying, especially while I was in law school. And this one thing he had on his website, it was a question. It said, the world's smallest political quiz: should goods and services be provided at the barrel of a gun? And that kind of pushed me over the edge, that probing. I was like, wow, no, of course not. Goods and services should not be provided at the barrel of a gun. That's horrible. That wouldn't be acceptable. And that's what made me realize that's exactly what government is. It's goods and services at the barrel of a gun. And that's what pushed me over the edge into the concept of voluntarism. And, from there, research more Lysander Spooner and other things like that. But it was a lot of just kind of self-knowledge and discovery, researching what the government's really doing.
That's interesting.
That's quite the rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's a very organic way.
Like you went way down in there. Like, wow.
I know. Like,
oh yeah. I just didn't want to vote for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton, but wow.
I guess anything that'll get it done.
Yeah. I mean, if you knew some of the things I knew from all those years of studying and also practicing law and things like that, you would wonder, how you wake up every day knowing what I know, but. It's bad. It's really bad.
I do find it interesting, very interesting, that it seems the more people learn, the further they go toward liberty. If that makes any sense. And it just, ties directly in line with it. Jack, you're sitting here saying that the way you got there was researching and learning. And I was a similar way. I started by thinking, oh yeah, no, look, you got to have a state. You got to have a state. You can't not. And then the more I researched and the more I read and the more information that I seeked out, I realized it's not ethical. There's no way to make this wash out in my head now, knowing what I know.
Well, that's what I see actually is I think of it like this. With almost everyone, of course, this is a generalization and it's not scientific here, but based on my experience and doing a lot of liberty outreach, which I've reached millions to say the least, the thing is finding a fact, a real fact that shocks someone's their consciousness. If you can find some truth that makes someone question everything they know, you know what I mean? Something that a long-held, deeply held view, if you can give someone a fact that contradicts that, and they're willing to take that shock and use it as an opportunity to learn, that can really change people. Of course, you're going to have people double down, but if you can find that one fact that makes someone say, oh my God, I had no idea this was going on. What else don't I know? That is the way to get someone to go down the rabbit trail to liberty. And that's what I really see is I think everyone, no matter where they're starting out in life in the status paradigm, left, right, whatever you want to say, there's something that if you show them that, whatever interesting fact it is or whatever the government's done, if you show them that, it will start or spark a psychological revolution. It will make them say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I cannot believe that. And I think that's really the key is reaching people out with those kinds of things, those things that the government doesn't want them to know, the things that's not covered in public school, the things that politicians are never going to talk about, because it gets people to realize, wow, the government is, full of liars. And I don't know what the PG or PG-13 rating on this, but basically,
No, you're good.
pieces of poop. I'm just keeping it down here just in case, but that's I don't know what your rating is for the show, but it's
In 17. No.
Yeah, you're good. You can say whatever you want, but yeah, I feel it.
I think one of the things for me, like how you mentioned that fact, was I kind of stumbled across something about the Trail of Tears, and I was like, okay, I remember kind of reading a little bit about this. It was like a Wikipedia article or something like that. I was like, okay, I kind of remember reading a little bit about it, and kind of just kind of like glancing through, a little bit, and I was like, wait, it was called the Indian Removal Act?
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, hold on. And I was like, wait, that was the name? Indian Removal Act? Like, it wasn't like how they tried to do now, like, the Family Protection.
Yeah.
The Family Protection Act or
Liberty
something like that. I was like it was
Right.
Indian Removal Act. I was like, wow, that's intense. And it really that always like really stuck with me that
wow.
That we kind of we judge other countries and stuff like that, based on their historical atrocities, and the ones that we committed. Well, I say we as in the country, and I'm not saying we. I'm not trying to collectivize like that, but that America committed, they're just kind of shoved to the side. They're not taught in school,
amazing.
and
That's intentional, I'm sure.
oh yeah, I mean, it's
Today it would be called the Native Preservation Act instead.
yeah, something
Right.
like that. Yeah.
Right.
Like the Patriot Act.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh, just so shady.
Right.
So shady. Okay. So I'll give you back the rest of your evening. Is there anything that you'd like to mention or that you'd like to plug that we haven't talked about already before we go?
The only thing that I guess is really coming up is the end of the Voluntaryist comic campaign. I mean, if you like comics, if you like liberty, I know I'm doing a niche of a niche here, but it's a cool thing because it's really helped me get the message of liberty out to a new medium. I mean, the future is going to be anime and comics anyway. So sorry to all the people who hate on anime or whatever, but I've worked with the young kids, and guess what? They all love it. It's going to be the next big thing, just like comics is really hot right now because of those 80s kids. So if you want to be on the next wave and helping to push forward the next mediums for liberty, Voluntaryist is where it's at, because I'll definitely be tabling in the future and going to Comic Cons and stuff like that, and it's going to rock their socks off.
And where can they go? Sorry, 1 second. Where can they go to find that again?
Volcomic.com. That's VOLCOMIC. So volcomic.com. And the links are all there, right front and center, and past issues, anything you want to know about it, it's all right there. So it's on Indiegogo. And it's, just about 7 days left. We've done pretty well so far this campaign. I'm hoping to beat the last one, make this the longest issue yet, but I'm really excited. I love that other people are doing it too. Johnny Rocket has his own, Liberty Force comic that came out too. And so, that's a great comic as well. And there's other people who are doing all kinds of new things for liberty and creative culture and stuff, like even Eric July's music. I like that. More people are looking for ways to integrate liberty into culture. And that's really what needs to happen to make meaningful changes for the future.
Yeah, I agree. Lonnie, did you have something to say there? I'm sorry, buddy.
No, I was saying one thing. This is kind of getting some gears turning here. We need to do an episode on comics and political. Shoot, I don't know, but
Political undertones.
Statism and libertarianism in comics, and I think.
We could talk about how Thanos is essentially Kyle Wagner.
No, Thanos is actually Mao. So
no way, man. He's like, I saw that and I walked away and I was like, this is the most utilitarian motherfucker.
Oh, well, yeah, for sure. But yeah, we need to do that, and if we do that, I think we need to have Jack on again. So,
sure, I'd be down.
Yeah, man. If you'd like to, I'd love to have you on again. I'd love to talk about it because I remember all that. I still have a bunch of my old comics. I followed them when the Infinity War thing came out. I remembered the Thanos story, right? But it's funny because I went and I watched it again, and I have just like you guys are talking about, the political undertones were so much louder. Well, of course, they're so much louder. I wasn't paying attention to it at all when I was a kid, but
Right.
I was just thinking about it the whole time. I'm like, Thanos, oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, I have a feeling it'll eventually, if we do an episode on that, it'll turn into a shouting match where I'm just like, look, Captain America is not a fascist. You take that back.
Yeah, we all have our favorites. Okay.
I'm kind of even as an ANCAP, I'm kind of a fan of Captain America. I really like him. So,
Right. Well, Civil War. I mean, in the comic, the movie watered it down, but in the comic, he really was very libertarian leaning. I mean, the values he espoused were well articulated for individualism. So.
Yeah, he was a good character. We'll have to do that. We'll have to get into that. That does sound it does sound interesting. We can go on about Kyle Wagner as Thanos. So everyone knows all of our regular stuff. This is always a mouthful. So you can go to facebook.com/thinkliberty.tl. You can go to our YouTube. That's Facebook. You can go to our YouTube. That's Think Liberty TV. You can go to Twitter, which is Think_Liberty. You can find us on Instagram, Think Liberty, one word. Go and find us on iTunes or Stitcher or whatever and give us reviews because that's great. And it makes all those systems love us more.
Got a problem with Twitter? Blame me. So whatever.
Yeah. Lonnie
it is not Twitter, so if you're collective undergoing, or what, I don't even have the right words here, but it's just me. So if you got a problem with something on Twitter, don't blame the rest of Think Liberty, just blame me.
That's fair.
People have done that before. They've brought up, I used a Pepe meme one time. Use one Pepe meme and now you're an alt-right publication. It's
I know, right?
People are going to run
so
with
ridiculous.
It. Yeah. All right, fellas. Well, thanks a bunch. I appreciate your time. On behalf of Jack and on behalf of Lonnie, thank you for listening. And whether or not you like it, we will probably be back again.